The hollow oak stood at the edge of the forbidden forest like something the world had forgotten to tear down. Its bark was dark and cracked, split open at the base by decades of rain and frost, and the hollow inside was just wide enough for a grown woman to kneel before it. No one came to this part of the forest. The border patrols from both neighboring packs avoided it. The deer did not graze here. Even the wind seemed to slow before it reached the clearing, as if out of respect for whatever rested inside the tree. Heather Cooper came anyway. She came on the same night every year, when the full moon climbed high enough to bleach everything silver and the forest turned the color of old bone. She came without a lantern because she did not need one. Her feet had memorized every root, every dip in the earth, every step of the path she had walked alone for 4 years. She pressed her palm flat against the bark first. She always did that. It was the closest thing she had to knocking. Then she lowered herself to her knees in the soft mud at the base of the tree and she reached carefully inside the hollow until her fingers touched the small wooden toy she had placed there on her very first visit. A little horse, no longer than her hand, carved roughly from a branch she had found on the ground the morning after she buried him. The carving was dark now, stained deep with moisture and time, but it was still whole. She pulled it out and held it in both hands. She did not cry right away. She never did. The grief did not come quickly anymore. It arrived slowly, the way cold arrived in winter, spreading from her chest outward until her arms felt heavy and her throat closed over and the first tears came without warning. "I came back," she said softly, to no one the world could see. "I told you I would always come back." The moon sat directly above the clearing. The forest was completely still. She had no idea that tonight was different from any other night. She had no idea that someone had followed her through the trees. She had no idea that a man crouched 30 feet behind her, one hand braced against a thick pine, watching her with an expression that was not curiosity and was not pity but was something heavier than both. She had no idea that he had been watching her for longer than tonight. She had no idea that he already knew her name. She tucked the little horse gently back inside the hollow, arranged it the same way she always did, facing outward so the carved face caught the moonlight, and she pressed her forehead against the bark and she whispered the same words she always whispered at the end. "I am sorry I could not keep you safe. I am sorry I did not know. I will not stop trying to find out what happened. I promise." She rose slowly, her knees wet with mud, her dark hair tangled from the walk through the undergrowth, and she turned to leave. The man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall. Broad through the shoulders. A fur-lined black cloak fell from his shoulders to the back of his knees. He wore dark leather beneath it, fitted armor with gold detailing along the collar and the cuffs. There was a long sword at his hip that he made no move toward. His dark hair was uncut and slightly wild from the wind. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a thin pale line that told of something old and violent. His eyes were steady on her face. Heather went absolutely still. Every instinct in her body screamed. Not because he looked dangerous, though he did. But because no one was supposed to know about this place. No one was supposed to know about Boyd. This hollow tree and the small grave inside it were the only secret she had left in the world. The man did not rush. He did not speak immediately. He simply looked at her the way a person looks at something they have been searching for long enough that finding it requires a moment of stillness before the next step. Then he lowered himself slowly to one knee in the mud in front of the hollow tree. His head bowed. Heather stopped breathing. When he raised his face to look at her again, his voice was quiet, careful, like a man approaching something that could shatter. "Tell me his name," he said. "Not, who are you? Not, what are you doing here? Not, this is forbidden territory. Tell me his name." Heather's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a breath. "How do you know there is a him? The Alpha King of the Silver Mark Pack looked at her without flinching. "Because I have been investigating his death for 2 years," he said. "And I believe he did not die the way they told you he did." The forest held its breath. Heather Cooper stood in the moonlight before the hollow oak that held the only piece of her son she had left in this world, and for the first time in 4 years, someone other than herself was kneeling before Boyd's resting place. She did not know if she should run or weep or fall to her knees beside him. She did not know if this man was the answer to 4 years of prayers or the most dangerous thing that had ever found her. She only knew one thing with absolute certainty. Everything was about to change. Chapter 1, The Woman Everyone Blamed. 4 years earlier, Heather Cooper had been a different kind of woman. Not louder. Not bolder. But lighter. There had been a steadiness to her then, a quiet confidence she carried in her posture, in the way she met people's eyes, in the small smile that came easily in those days when life was still full of the ordinary, unremarkable joys that only become visible after they are gone. She had been an Omega, born into the Ashwood Pack in the Eastern Territories. Omega meant she was not a fighter. Not a leader. She was a healer's apprentice, a gardener, a keeper of things. Her hands were good with plants and with people in equal measure. She could make things grow. She could make people feel heard. She had dark raven hair that fell past her shoulders and pale skin that flushed pink when she laughed and gray-blue eyes that were her most distinctive feature, the kind of eyes that seemed to hold a thought slightly longer than a person expected. Robert had noticed those eyes first. Robert was a Leakin warrior. Gold-brown hair, athletic, proud in the way warriors were proud, with a posture that announced itself before he spoke. He was handsome in an obvious way, the kind of handsome that came with status and confidence and the easy assumption that rooms would arrange themselves around him. He had noticed her during the harvest gathering when she was 17. He had brought her a cup of warm cider that she had not asked for and said, with a grin that apparently worked on most people, that he had never seen anyone look at a row of dying beans with that much personal concern. She had laughed. She had not meant to. But she had. They were bonded 3 years later. The bond was not the full claiming. It was the first stage, the recognition bond, the one that tied two wolves together emotionally and promised a future. Heather had been happy. Quietly, steadily, completely happy in the way that felt too solid to be questioned. Then she became pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. She was sick through most of it, exhausted in a way that she could not explain to the healers who kept telling her everything looked normal. Something did not feel normal. Something felt like her body was working against itself, like a door that had been forced open rather than unlocked. She mentioned this to Robert. He told her she was anxious. He told her first pregnancies were always hard. He said it with the sort of gentle dismissiveness that was almost kind except for the way it closed the conversation. Boyd was born on a cold night in early winter. He was perfect. 10 fingers. 10 toes. A small, round face with a faint impression of her gray-blue eyes. He was not breathing. The healer, an older woman named Soren who served on the pack's elder council, worked over him for a long time. Heather lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and counted the wooden beams and told herself, "He is fine, he will cry in a moment, she will hear it, she just needs to wait." She waited. She did not hear it. When Soren finally turned to face her, the woman's expression was already arranged in the specific blankness of someone delivering a verdict they have practiced. "I am sorry," Soren said. The child was not strong enough. It happens sometimes with Omega bloodlines. There are certain genetic weaknesses that carry through. It was not grief she felt first. It was confusion. The word genetic sat wrong in her mind the way a stone sits wrong in a shoe, uncomfortable and inexplicable and impossible to ignore. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means the bloodline failed the child," Soren said. Then Robert came in. He had been waiting outside. Heather turned her face toward him and she reached for him and he came close enough that she could see his face and she read it, and something in her already knew, before he said a word, that the man she was about to face was not the man she had spent 3 years building a life beside. He did not hold her. He stood very still, a distance of 2 full steps between them that somehow felt like a country. "Soren told me," he said. "About the bloodline. About what it means." Heather said nothing. She was still holding out her hand toward him. He did not take it. "There will be a tribunal," he said quietly. "They need to discuss the implications for the pack. For the bond. For what comes next." "Robert. I am sorry, Heather. I am. But I have a duty to the pack. Elder Soren says the risk is too great to continue the bond with a compromised bloodline." She says. "She says what? What compromised bloodline?" "Our son just died." "Our son." He looked away. She saw it happen, the look away, and she understood that no words she could speak would follow him past it. The tribunal was held 3 days later, while she was still bleeding, still swollen, still waking every few hours from a sleep that offered no rest. Elder Soren spoke at length about genetics. About the responsibility of strong bloodlines. About the danger of perpetuating weakness in a pack. Robert stood and formally withdrew the recognition bond. He did not look at her while he did it. She sat very straight in her chair and she held her hands in her lap and she did not make a sound. The pack cast her out the same night. They walked her to the eastern border, 2 senior warriors flanking her, and they left her at the tree line with the dress on her back and the small wooden horse she had carved in the last week of her pregnancy, sitting up at night when she could not sleep, hoping the baby would like it. Boyd was still inside the pack's infirmary. She had asked to see him one more time. They had said no. She spent the first night in the space between forests, in the cold, with the horse in her hands and nowhere to go and a grief so large it did not have room to move inside her chest. By morning she had made 2 decisions. The first was that she would bury her son herself, somewhere no one could take him from her. The second was that she would survive. Not for anyone else. Just to prove she could. Chapter 2, The Night She Found the Oak. She found Boyd's body 3 days later. She had gone back to the Ashwood border in the early hours before dawn, when the patrols were thinnest. A young warrior who had been kind to her once, a boy named Lars who was barely 19, had left something wrapped in linen at the base of the eastern gate post. She did not ask how he had managed it. She pressed her hand briefly to his arm and then she walked back into the cold with the bundle held to her chest. She walked for 2 hours before she found the clearing. The hollow oak was there, ancient and cracked, its roots spread wide through the dark earth like the fingers of a hand reaching down. The moon was not full that night. It was a thin crescent, barely enough light to see by, but enough. She dug with her hands and then with a flat stone and then with her hands again until the hole was deep enough and lined with the softest moss she could pull from the surrounding bark. She placed the linen bundle inside. She packed moss over and around it. Then she found the hollow in the tree's base and she placed the small wooden horse inside it, facing outward, and she sat in the mud for a long time before she finally stood up. "Your name is Boyd," she said. "You were loved. I want you to know that. Whatever they say about bloodlines and weakness, you were loved before you were born. You are loved now. And I will not forget you." She came back the next full moon. And the one after that. And every full moon for 4 years, while she built a quiet, invisible life in the borderlands between 2 packs that had no claim on her and no interest in someone like her. She did not talk about Boyd. She did not talk about Robert. She worked wherever work was available. She tended gardens. She assisted with harvests. She learned, slowly and without announcement, how to take up as little space as possible in a world that had already told her she cost too much. The hollow oak was the one place she was allowed to be large again. The one place she said everything she could not say elsewhere. She had no idea it was sacred ground. She had no idea the ancient wolf gods had claimed this forest before any pack had laid a border stone anywhere in the territory. She had no idea that the roots of the oak ran deep enough to hold memory. She had no idea what was growing, slowly and quietly, beneath the surface of everything she thought she knew. Chapter 3, The Alpha Who Knelt. His name was Edward Vaughn. Alpha King of the Silver Mark Pack. A territory 4 times the size of Ashwood, spanning 3 valleys and 2 mountain passes, governed by a man who had taken the title at 23 after his father's sudden death and spent the decades since being described, depending on who was describing, as either the most principled leader in the region or the most ruthlessly patient one. He was 33 now. Tall enough that doorframes were a mild inconvenience. Shoulders broad enough that his tailor had, on more than one occasion, expressed quiet frustration. He had a long jaw and dark eyes and a scar through his left eyebrow from a fight at 18 that he did not talk about, not because it was painful but because the story was honestly not that interesting and he preferred not to perform drama he did not feel. He was still in the mud in front of the hollow oak when Heather took her first step backward. He noticed immediately. "I am not a threat to you," he said. Her second step backward was smaller. She was calculating, he could see it in her eyes, the path through the trees, the distance between them, whether the mud would slow her down. "My name is Edward Vaughn. I am the Alpha of the Silver Mark Pack. This is Silver Mark territory. I am here because I have spent 2 years trying to find out where you were, and I need you to know that I am aware that sentence sounds alarming and I am going to explain it properly if you will give me 60 seconds. She stopped moving. She did not step closer. But she stopped moving. 60 seconds. She said. Her voice was carefully even. She had learned, in 4 years of invisible living, how to keep a voice even. He stood slowly, one hand raised slightly, palm forward, the universal gesture of a person showing they hold nothing. 2 years ago, I received a report from a border patrol that mentioned an Omega who had been exiled from Ashwood following the death of a newborn. The report was routine. My patrol only mentioned it because she had been found sleeping in the borderlands and the warriors were not sure what protocol applied. I would have filed it and moved on except that the same report noted that Elder Soren of Ashwood had authorized the exile personally, within 48 hours of the birth. Heather said nothing. Her face was very still. Soren does not involve herself in exile proceedings. She has never authorized one personally. In 20 years of pack records, every exile from Ashwood was processed through the Beta's office. Except yours. So I started asking why. And what did you find? He held her gaze. Enough to know that what they told you about your son was not true. And enough to know that I cannot prove it yet. Not without you. The forest was silent around them. Heather looked at this man for a long time. She looked at his cloak and his sword and his Alpha's posture and the way he was standing with his weight forward, not aggressive but close enough to be urgent. She looked at his face, at the scar above his eyebrow, at the absence of amusement there, at the thing that sat in his expression instead. He looked like a man who had seen something that bothered him and had not let it go. She had met enough dishonest people in 4 years to recognize the specific flavor of sincerity. It was quieter than it looked in stories. It did not announce itself. It simply stayed in place when everything else would move. He was still here. He had knelt before her son's grave. His name was Boyd. She said. Edward Vaughn did not move. He only nodded, once, carefully, as if she had given him something that required handling. Boyd. He said quietly. Tell me what happened. From the beginning. Everything. Heather looked at the hollow oak. Then she looked back at him. I have never told anyone. She said. I know. He said. Tell me anyway. Chapter 4, Secrets Inside the Oak. They sat on the exposed roots of the oak for 2 hours. Heather talked. She had not talked about any of it in 4 years, and she had not realized how much pressure the silence had created, the way water builds behind a dam, not with drama but with slow, accumulating weight, until the telling of it felt like releasing something physical from her body. She told him about the pregnancy, about the feeling that something was wrong that no one would hear. She told him about the birth and about Soren's face and about the word genetic and how it had sat wrong from the moment she heard it. She told him about Robert, and she told that part of the story flatly, without embellishment, because there was no version of it that required decoration to be devastating. She told him about the exile. About the border. About Lars leaving Boyd's body for her in the dark. She told him about this tree. Edward listened the way very few people knew how to listen, without filling the silences with comfort or with questions that were really just redirections. He let the story be the shape it actually was. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. The diagnosis Elder Soren gave. He said. Genetic failure of the bloodline. Did she give you documentation? A healer's report? Any written record? Heather frowned. No. She spoke at the tribunal. That was all. And was there a second healer present at the birth? No. Soren alone. Who requested Soren specifically? Heather opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Robert. She said slowly. Robert requested Soren. He said she was the most experienced healer in the pack. He arranged it 2 weeks before Boyd was due. Edward said nothing, but something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, the controlled adjustment of a man who has just confirmed a suspicion and is deciding how much of that confirmation to show. Heather saw it. What are you thinking? She asked. I am thinking. He said carefully. That I want my healer to look at this tree. Heather looked at him sharply. The tree has nothing to do with. This forest is old. He said. Older than any pack claim. The ancient wolf gods marked certain sites across this territory as sacred ground. Hollow oaks especially. The roots hold trace evidence for centuries. My healer is trained in old forest reading. If anything was brought to this clearing in the past 4 years, she may be able to identify it. Heather stared at him. Are you saying someone was here before me? At this tree? I am saying it is possible. I am saying it would explain some things I cannot otherwise explain about the timing of your exile. The wind moved through the clearing for the first time all night, just barely, stirring the leaves of the oak softly above them. Heather looked at the hollow where the little wooden horse sat in the dark, and she thought about 4 years of coming here alone and believing this was a private grief in a private place that belonged only to her and Boyd. The idea that someone else had been here before her made the ground feel less solid beneath her. Who would have come here? She asked. Someone who needed neutral ground. Edward said. And someone who did not want to be found. Chapter 5. A home among strangers. Edward offered her sanctuary in Silvermark before the night was over. She did not accept immediately. She stood at the edge of the clearing with her arms folded and her expression careful, and she asked him 3 questions. The first was whether she would be expected to follow pack hierarchy as an Omega. He said no. She would be a guest, not a pack member, for as long as she preferred it. The second was whether anyone in Silvermark was connected to Ashwood politically. He said yes. One advisor, a man named Combs, held a trading agreement with Ashwood leadership. He told her this without hesitation, which she noted. The third was whether he expected anything from her in exchange for the investigation. He looked at her for a moment before he answered. I expect the truth about what happened to Boyd. Nothing more and nothing less. If that truth leads where I think it leads, it will affect far more than just your case. I am not doing this for you alone, Heather. I am doing it because something corrupt is operating in this region and it needs to be found. She thought about that. That is an honest answer. She said. I try to be. He said. She came to Silvermark 2 days later, arriving at the main gate in the early morning with a single bag over her shoulder and the careful expression of a person who had learned not to let their arrival in a place look like hope. The woman who met her at the gate was not what she expected. Melissa Foster was Edward's head healer. She was warm-faced and broad-shouldered and she wore a healer's apron over her clothes and she had the kind of smile that suggested she had seen most things and was not easily rattled by any of them. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and a practical manner and a pair of hands that had clearly spent decades doing useful work. She took one look at Heather and said, "You need a hot meal and a room with a proper mattress and no one asking you anything for at least 2 days. Yes?" Heather blinked. "Yes," she said. "Good. Come on then." The room Melissa showed her was small but clean. A window that faced east. A bed with a real mattress. A wash basin. A shelf with 2 small books on it that someone had left and apparently never retrieved. Heather sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after Melissa left. She looked at the window. The early light was coming through it in a way that was almost kind. She had not slept inside a proper building in 4 years. She pressed her hands flat on the mattress and she allowed herself, very carefully, the small and dangerous thing of noticing that she was somewhere that felt, if not safe, at least less dangerous than everywhere else she had been. Then she lay down and slept for 12 hours. Chapter 6, Learning to Breathe Again. She met Lola on the 3rd day. Lola was Melissa's apprentice, young enough that she still moved through the world with the brisk confidence of someone who had not yet had enough reasons to slow down. She was cheerful in a way that was not performed and she asked questions the way a person throws open curtains, immediately and without ceremony. "Are you the woman Edward found at the Forbidden Forest?" "Because we have all been told not to ask about that, but I am asking anyway because I think secrets make people anxious and you look like you have enough of those already." Heather stared at her. "You are the most direct person I have met in 4 years," she said. "Is that a compliment?" "I have not decided yet." "Fair enough. Do you want to come see the greenhouse? We have a section of medicinal herbs that has completely lost its mind and Melissa thinks it is a fungal issue and I think it is a drainage issue and neither of us is going to admit we need a second opinion because we are both too proud, so having a fresh set of eyes would be useful." Heather went to the greenhouse. It was a drainage issue. She identified it in about 4 minutes. Lola crowed so loudly about being right that Melissa came in from the other end of the building to find out what had happened, and somehow that became the 3 of them spending the afternoon replanting an entire raised bed of winter sage while Lola narrated the experience as though it were an adventure of considerable importance. Heather did not laugh. Not out loud. But somewhere in the region of her chest something shifted, the way a muscle shifts after being held tight for too long and is finally, reluctantly, allowed to release. She ran into Edward that evening in the corridor outside the library. He was carrying a stack of files and did not see her until she was already in his path. He stopped. She stopped. They looked at each other in the slightly awkward way of 2 people who had their most significant conversation in the mud at midnight and are now standing in a corridor in ordinary light. "The greenhouse," he said. "Lola told me you identified the drainage problem. It was not difficult. She has been arguing with Melissa about it for 3 weeks. Melissa is going to claim she knew all along. I am going to stay out of that entirely." Something moved at the edge of his expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape that came before one. "How are you finding it here?" she asked, because she was not willing to be the only one answering questions. "I live here," he said. "I know. I meant, how do you find it on a day you notice it? Most people stop noticing their home. He looked at her for a moment. Useful, he said. Loud, occasionally. The warriors have an ongoing argument about a particular training drill that I am not going to resolve because they are all wrong and they will work it out eventually. But mostly useful. You like useful things, she said. I like things that are what they say they are, he said. He moved past her into the corridor. She stood where she was for a moment, thinking about that. She liked things that were what they said they were too. She had simply not had many of them lately. Chapter 7, What Melissa Found. Melissa went to the Hollow Oak 2 weeks after Heather arrived in Silver Mark. She went alone, in the day, with her medical kit and a leather journal and the kind of focus that Melissa brought to anything she was taking seriously, which was the same focus she brought to everything. She spent 4 hours in the clearing. She came back with soil samples, bark samples, and a very specific silence around her that the people who knew her had learned to recognize as the quiet that came before news she was not certain how to deliver. She went directly to Edward's study and she closed the door behind her. Edward looked up from his desk. Tell me, he said. There is a concentrated residue in the soil approximately 18 inches from the root base on the west side of the tree, she said, setting her samples on the desk. It is old, but it is not old enough to be natural. It has the chemical signature of something that was introduced deliberately. What is it? Nightroot extract. Specifically the processed form, not raw. Someone distilled it. Edward was very still. Nightroot affects gestation, he said. It was not a question. In high enough concentration, nightroot extract administered to a pregnant wolf during the final weeks would interfere with the pup's respiratory development. The pup would appear healthy, perfectly formed, but the lungs would not function correctly at birth. The room was absolutely quiet. It would look like natural stillbirth, he said. To anyone not specifically testing for it. Yes. And would a standard healer's examination at the time of birth identify it? Only if the healer was looking for it, Melissa said. They looked at each other. Elder Soren, he said. She would have known exactly what to look for. And exactly how to not find it. Melissa sat down. Edward. If someone administered nightroot to Heather during her pregnancy, they had to have access to her. Regular access. Someone close. I know. The question is not just who. It is why. What did Boyd's death gain someone that his life would have prevented? That, said Edward, is what we are going to find out. Chapter 8, The Threads Begin to Show. It was Lola who found the medical records. She was cataloging old healer files from a neighboring PAC's archives, a routine administrative task that should have taken an afternoon and turned into something else entirely when she found a set of records misfiled under a reference code that had not been active for 6 years. The records were from Ashwood's infirmary. From the period surrounding Boyd's birth. They were signed by a healer named Soren. They did not match the records Ashwood had submitted to the regional council. There were 2 sets of notes for the same patient, for Heather, for the same period. The official set described a routine difficult pregnancy with no intervention. The second set, the one that had been misfiled in an entirely different archive, described something else. Lola brought them to Melissa. Melissa read them twice. Then she brought them to Edward. Edward read them once. Where did these come from? He asked. They were in the Thornwick archive, Lola said. Under a reference code belonging to a trading agreement between Ashwood and Thornwick that was terminated 5 years ago. Someone put them there to lose them. Someone put them there believing they would stay lost. Edward said. They nearly did, said Lola. He looked at the records again. The second set of notes detailed, in Soren's own careful handwriting, a course of treatment for a pregnancy complication that had not been reported in the official record. The treatment notation stopped abruptly 12 days before Boyd's due date. In the margin of the final page, in handwriting that was not Soren's, were 4 words. Executed as discussed. R. Melissa said quietly. She did not say the name. They all knew it. Edward set the records down. We need to move carefully, he said. These records place Soren and Robert in a coordinated action. But they do not tell us why. There is a layer beneath this that we have not reached yet. Someone directed this. Someone had a reason large enough to kill an infant for it. What reason is large enough for that? Lola asked. Power, said Melissa. Usually, said Edward. It is always power. Chapter 9, Someone Wants Her Silent. Heather had been in Silvermark for 6 weeks when she realized she was being watched. Not by Edward's people. She had grown comfortable enough with their rhythms to know the difference between routine observation and the specific, careful attention of someone who was trying to see without being seen. The first time she noticed it was in the market quarter, a man standing at the edge of a stall who turned away a fraction too quickly when she glanced in his direction. The second time was outside the greenhouse, a shadow that resolved itself into a person at the far end of the garden path who disappeared before she could see a face. She told Edward that evening. He did not dismiss her. He listened, and then he called Higgins. Higgins was Edward's head warrior, a large, heavy-bearded man with a collection of battle scars that he had organized over the years into a personal catalog, and a dry sense of humor that he used the way other people used punctuation, selectively but effectively. He was, in Lola's words, the kind of man you would want standing between you and whatever was coming, partly because he was very good at it and partly because he would give you a running commentary the entire time. She is right, Higgins said after 48 hours of his own watching. 2 men. Rotating shifts. They came in through the East Trader Gate 4 days ago and they have been staying at the inn on the Market Road. They are not Silvermark and they are not random. Ashwood? Edward asked. Their boots are Ashwood make. Their accent is Northern Ashwood. And one of them has a symbol on his belt that belongs to Elder Soren's personal household. The room went very quiet. Heather sat across the table and felt the specific cold that came with the confirmation of something you had hoped you were imagining. They know I am here, she said. They know you are here and they know what we are investigating, Edward said. Which means there is a leak. He looked at Higgins. Combs. Higgins said simply. You are certain? Certain enough that I have been logging his communications for the past week. He has been sending letters through the trader's route to an address in Ashwood that corresponds to a political office connected to a man named Ricardo. Ricardo. Edward said the name with a flatness that told Heather it was not a new name to him. Who is Ricardo? She asked. A council candidate. Ambitious. Well-funded. And connected to Elder Soren through 3 intermediaries that I have been trying to trace for a year. He is the layer beneath the layer. Heather said slowly. I think so, Edward said. And if he believes we are close to proving it, he is going to take action. He already is, said Higgins. The 2 men outside are watchers. He will send something else next. He was right. 3 days later, Heather came back from the greenhouse after dark and found her room door slightly open. She had not left it open. She did not go in. She stood in the corridor and called for Higgins, who was there in 90 seconds, and who searched the room and found a small ceramic vial beneath her pillow that he wrapped very carefully in cloth before anyone touched it. Melissa identified the contents the next morning. Concentrated nightroot extract. The same compound that had been used on Heather 4 years ago. Someone was not just watching. Someone was trying to finish what had been started. Chapter 10. The woman she was becoming. Edward moved her to a room closer to his own quarters the same day. He told her this plainly, without apology or excessive explanation, as a security decision rather than a personal one. She accepted plainly, for the same reasons. But something in the arrangement changed the texture of their days. The corridor they shared was quieter than the rest of the building. They passed each other more often. They began to speak in the evenings when both of them were done with the day's work and neither of them had fully wound down from it. It started with practical things. Updates on the investigation. Reports from Higgins. Progress notes from Melissa. But it became other things gradually, the way a path becomes a path not because anyone decided it would be one but because people kept walking the same way for the same reasons. He told her about Silver Mark. About the pack's history and the mountain passes and the old trading routes and the particular problem of managing 3 valleys at once in winter when the passes closed and everything had to be planned in advance. She told him about plants. About the way different herbs responded to different soils and why most people overwatered their gardens because they were treating the plant's visible anxiety rather than the underlying condition. That sounds like something that applies to more than plants. He said. Most things do. She said. One evening she came into the corridor and found him sitting on the floor outside the library door with a stack of files on his knees and a look on his face that she recognized as the face of a man who has been working for too many hours and is beginning to lose the thread. Go to bed. She said. He looked up. I am almost done. You have been almost done for 2 hours. I can hear you from my room. You can hear me reading. I can hear you sighing. It is very rhythmic. He looked at her for a moment and then, so unexpectedly that she almost missed it, he laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was real, slightly tired, genuine in the way that things were genuine at the end of a long day when the careful management of presentation had mostly been retired. Heather stood in the corridor and felt something in the region of her chest do something she had not given it permission to do. She walked away before he could see her expression. She did not sleep for a while after that. She was not entirely sure what she was feeling, but she knew it was something she had not felt in 4 years, something she had told herself she was no longer capable of feeling, and its arrival was simultaneously the most welcome and the most frightening thing that had happened to her in a very long time. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Chapter 11, What Robert Did Not Know. Robert came to Silvermark on a gray morning in early spring. He came alone, without armor, without a warrior's escort. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well for a long time, which was accurate. His gold-brown hair was unsettled and there were shadows under his eyes and the proud posture that had once defined him had been replaced with something that looked like a person carrying something they had not chosen to carry. Higgins found him at the gate and brought him to Edward. Heather was in the library when this happened. She stayed there. She was not ready to see him yet and she knew herself well enough at this point to honor that without guilt. Robert sat across from Edward in the study and he said, I know I have no claim on your cooperation. I know you have no reason to trust me. I am here because someone sent me a letter last week. An anonymous letter. It contained a copy of a medical record I have never seen before. He placed the paper on Edward's desk. Edward already knew what it was. He had sent it. He let Robert continue. I requested Elder Soren as Heather's healer because Soren approached me 3 weeks before Boyd was born and told me she had a personal concern about the pregnancy. She said she had identified a potential complication and wanted to manage it herself to protect both Heather and the child. He stopped. I believed her. He said. I believed her because she was the most senior healer in the pack and because she came to me with what seemed like genuine concern and because I was 26 and proud and I did not question things I should have questioned. And the tribunal? Edward said. Soren told me on the night of Boyd's birth that the child had died due to a bloodline deficiency in Heather's genetics. She had documents. Official-looking documents. She told me the bond had to be severed immediately to protect the pack. She told me the longer I waited, the more damage the bloodline connection could do. Robert's hands were flat on the table. Still. She told me Heather knew. She told me Heather had been aware of the bloodline issue and had not disclosed it before the bond. She told me the tribunal was necessary because of Heather's deception. She told me. He stopped again. I let them walk her to the border. I stood at the tribunal and I dissolved the bond and I told myself I was protecting the pack. And I never questioned it. Not once. Not for 4 years. Edward looked at him for a long time. The documents Soren gave you were fabricated. He said. Heather's bloodline has no deficiency. The medical records showing the real course of events have been recovered. Boyd was a healthy child who died because someone administered nightroot extract to Heather during her pregnancy without her knowledge. Robert did not speak. Elder Soren knew. She was present at the birth specifically to ensure the outcome they had planned. And the instruction to proceed came from Ricardo. A political operative with a specific reason to want Boyd dead. Why? Robert said. It was not quite a question. It was more like the sound a person makes when the structure they have built their last 4 years on collapses inward and they are standing in the rubble trying to understand the geography. Heather's bloodline. Edward said. Connects to an old pack lineage that carries a territorial claim to land that Ricardo has been trying to acquire. Boyd's birth would have activated that claim legally. Boyd alive meant Heather's line held the claim. Boyd dead, Heather publicly disgraced and exiled, the claim vanishes. Ricardo moves forward with his acquisition unopposed. Our son, Robert said, was killed for land. For land and political power. Yes. The room was very quiet. Robert put his face in his hands. Heather was not there to see it. She was in the library, turning the pages of a book she was not reading, waiting. She had not wanted revenge. She had wanted truth. The truth was arriving now. She could feel it, the way you feel weather changing, something in the air that told her the next hours were going to require everything she had. Chapter 12, Irene. Irene arrived in Silvermark the week before the Blood Moon Festival. She was elegant in the way that certain people were elegant, not as a performance but as a habit so old it had become architecture. She was beautiful, dark-eyed, and moved through a room as though she had already decided where she stood in relation to everything in it. She was the regional council's appointed observer for the festival proceedings. Heather had heard of her. The women of Ashwood had spoken of Irene the way people spoke of weather, with a mixture of respect and wariness, acknowledging its power while being uncertain of its direction. They met for the first time in the hall outside the council room. Irene looked at her carefully. "You are Heather Cooper," she said. "I am," said Heather. "I knew your mother. Many years ago." Heather went still. "My mother died when I was 4. "I know. I was there." She said it without drama. Without a setup. Just placed it in the conversation the way you place something on a table when your hands are too full to hold it anymore. "I owe you a debt I have never had an opportunity to pay," Irene said. "I knew about your bloodline. About the territorial claim. About what it meant. I was in a position to speak at the right time and I chose my own safety instead. If I had spoken, none of what happened to you or to Boyd would have been possible." Heather looked at her. There were things she could have said. Many of them. She chose this one. "Then you can speak now." Irene held her gaze. "Yes," she said. "That is why I am here." Chapter 13, Blood Moon Eve. The Blood Moon Festival gathered packs from across the region. It happened every 7 years, a convergence of leaders and healers and elders and warriors in the ceremonial grounds that sat on neutral territory at the junction of 4 pack boundaries. It was the most politically significant gathering in the region. Decisions made at Blood Moon carried weight that lasted until the next one. Ricardo knew this. He had been building toward this festival for 3 years, cultivating alliances, positioning supporters, arranging the votes he needed to take a council seat that would give him the authority to finalize the land acquisition he had killed an infant to protect. He had not anticipated Heather Cooper being alive, articulate, and standing inside Silvermark's protective walls with an alpha who had spent 2 years quietly gathering evidence. He adapted quickly. The night before the festival, Higgins intercepted 2 armed men at the western perimeter. They were carrying neither pack insignia nor trading papers. They were carrying weapons. And they were not alone. There were 7 more at the northern edge. Higgins dealt with the situation efficiently and with the specific calm of a man who had been expecting this and had arranged the welcome accordingly. The warriors who had been quietly positioned throughout the perimeter for the past 4 days emerged from their posts, and the 9 men found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered within 60 seconds. Higgins brought the information to Edward. "Ricardo is moving," he said. "Tonight was the test. When this fails, he will try something at the festival itself. He cannot move openly at the festival." Edward said. "He will not have to. He has Combs inside." Edward was quiet for a moment. "Combs is already neutralized," he said. "He has been receiving information that I have been curating for the past 3 weeks." Higgins looked at him. "You have been feeding Combs false intelligence." "I have been feeding Combs the version of events I wanted Ricardo to believe. Which is that we have less evidence than we have. That Heather is unwilling to speak publicly. That the medical records are disputed." Higgins was quiet for a moment. "So Ricardo walks into the festival tomorrow believing he still has the advantage," he said. "Yes," said Edward. "And we show him otherwise." Chapter 14, The Festival. The ceremonial grounds were full by mid-morning. Warriors in the colors of 6 different packs moved through the crowds. Elders gathered in the covered pavilions. Healers set up stations at the edges of the grounds. Traders brought their wares and their gossip in equal measure. Heather stood at the edge of the Silvermark section and watched it all. She was wearing clothes that Melissa had helped her find, something between her own plain practicality and the occasion, a deep blue dress with a fitted bodice and a long skirt, her dark raven hair pinned back. She looked nothing like the woman who had knelt in the mud in the borderlands for 4 years. She looked like herself, but a version of herself that had stopped apologizing for existing. Edward came to stand beside her. He did not speak immediately. They stood together watching the crowd. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," she said. "That is honest. I am going to do it anyway." "I know," he said. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, not in the searching way he had looked at her in the clearing on that first night, but in a different way, steadier, quieter, the way a person looks at something they have already decided about. "Edward," she said. "After today, whatever happens, I want you to know. Tell me after," he said gently. "Not because I do not want to hear it, but because I want you to say it when it is not before something difficult. I want it to be its own moment." She looked at him for a long second. "You are a very specific kind of person," she said. "So are you," he said. They walked toward the main pavilion. Chapter 15, The Confrontation. Ricardo was already in the pavilion when they arrived. He was standing with a group of council members, speaking with the ease of a man who had prepared his face for this day and was wearing it confidently. He was charismatic in the way that certain politicians were charismatic, all surface warmth and controlled timing, and the impression, skillfully maintained, that every word he said was being said for your particular benefit. He saw Heather enter and something moved through his expression so quickly that only someone who was looking for it would have caught it. Edward caught it. Heather caught it. Higgins, standing to the left, caught it. Irene walked in behind them. Ricardo's composure adjusted itself again, but slower this time. The council session began with routine business. Territorial reports. Trade agreements. Healer Guild updates. The normal machinery of governance that most people found dull, but that was, in its way, the thing that held the region together. Then Edward stood. He presented the case methodically. He had spent 11 years building a reputation for measured presentation, and he used all of it now, not to make the case more dramatic than it was but to make it more undeniable. He laid out the medical records, the soil analysis from the oak, the misfiled documents, the correspondence between Combs and Ricardo's political office. He named Soren. He named Combs. He named Ricardo. He did it without raised voice or theatrical pause. The pavilion went from rustling and murmuring to something that was not quite silence, because silence implies an absence of feeling. This was the opposite. This was a room full of people holding very still under the weight of what they were hearing. Ricardo stood when Edward was done. He was still composed. He was still wearing the face he had prepared. These are serious accusations from an alpha with a clear political interest in discrediting my candidacy. He said smoothly. The documents presented are disputed. The timeline is speculative. The woman at the center of this story has been living as a borderland exile with no verifiable account of her movements. She will speak for herself. Edward said. Heather stood. She had not spoken in front of a gathered crowd since the tribunal 4 years ago, the last time she had been surrounded by witnesses who had already decided what they believed before she opened her mouth. This was not that. She looked at Ricardo and she told the truth. Not the official version, not the sanitized version, not the version she had kept compressed inside herself for 4 years to make it easier to carry. She told the full version. The pregnancy. The feeling that something was wrong. The birth. The silence. Soren's face. Robert's face. The border in the middle of the night with Boyd already cold in her arms. The hollow tree. The years of coming back. She told it without making herself small. Without apologizing for it. Without looking down. When she was done, Irene stood. And Irene told what she knew. The room erupted. Chapter 16, The Fall. Ricardo moved before the council had finished processing what they had heard. He moved toward the exit with the quick, controlled purpose of a man executing a retreat he had pre-planned, because that kind of man always pre-planned a retreat. He made it exactly 4 steps. Higgins was already there. The warrior who had catalogued his battle scars and narrated entire fights with dry detachment stood at the exit with 2 of his people and looked at Ricardo with the specific, unimpressed expression of a man watching something predictable happen exactly the way he predicted. I would not. Higgins said. Ricardo stopped. There was a moment. The kind of moment that fiction makes dramatic and reality makes tedious, where a man calculates odds he has already lost and arrives at that understanding slowly. He was escorted from the pavilion by the council's own guard within the hour. Soren was brought in from Ashwood by the following morning. She arrived looking like a woman who had known this was coming and had made a decision a long time ago to face it with the dignity of someone who believes their version of events justifies the actions, which was the most dangerous kind of person because their conviction was real. She said nothing at the council. She looked at Heather once, briefly, and what was in that look was not remorse. It was something closer to a calculation she was still running. Heather did not flinch from it. She had decided the previous night that whatever she found in Soren's face, she was not going to carry it home with her. Not because she did not feel things about it. She felt a great many things about it. But because she had spent 4 years carrying things that did not belong to her and she was not willing to start again with new weight. Combs surrendered his position in Silvermark quietly. He released a written account of his communications with Ricardo that confirmed everything Edward had presented and added details that strengthened the case considerably. He did this, Higgins noted later, with his characteristic dryness, with the speed of a man who had been waiting to stop being guilty and was relieved that the opportunity had finally arrived. The council made its rulings over 3 days. Ricardo, stripped of candidacy, held for trial, territorial claims dissolved. Soren, expelled from the Healers Guild, removed from pack leadership, held for formal proceedings. Combs, removed from Silvermark service, barred from future council involvement. And then the council turned to Heather. They offered her the formal restoration of her standing. The acknowledgement that her exile had been unjust. The recognition that Boyd's death had not been the result of anything in her bloodline or her body or her choices. She listened to it all. She nodded when it was complete. "I would like one thing," she said. "I would like his name in the record. Boyd Cooper. I would like it noted that he existed, that he was a person, and that he is remembered." The council secretary wrote it. Boyd Cooper. Named. Recorded. Remembered. It was not everything. It would never be everything. But it was the thing that mattered most. Chapter 17, After. The festival grounds were quiet by the 3rd night. Most of the delegations had begun their journeys home. The tents were coming down at the edges of the clearing. The fire in the center burned low without anyone adding to it. Heather sat on the steps of the main pavilion with her hands in her lap and her shoes beside her on the stone because her feet hurt, and she had decided that was a reasonable thing to address. Edward came and sat beside her. He had been in meetings most of the day. He looked like a man who had been in meetings most of the day and was extremely glad the meetings were finished. They sat for a while without speaking. The fire crackled. Someone on the far side of the grounds was singing something quiet and wordless that drifted across the clearing and then away. "Robert asked to speak with you," Edward said. "I know. Melissa told me. Do you want to?" She was quiet for a moment. "Not yet. Maybe sometime. But not yet. He has things to work through that are not my work to help him with." That is a clear answer. I have been practicing having those. He looked at her. "You said something this morning. Before we went into the pavilion. You said you wanted me to know something. After." She had said that. She had hoped, a small hope, that he might have not noticed it in the rush of everything that followed. He had noticed it. She turned to look at him directly. He was watching her with that steadiness he had, the kind that did not demand anything but was simply present, reliable, the way a fixed point on the horizon was reliable when everything else was in motion. "I wanted to say," she said carefully, "that I have not been good at trusting people for a long time. For reasons that are obvious and also for reasons that are mine and were mine before any of this happened. And I have not wanted to feel things I do not know the outcome of, because feeling things that have no guaranteed outcome is the most frightening kind of risk I know." She stopped. "But," he said. "But I think I have been trusting you for a while. Without deciding to. It just happened. And I think that is significant." "It is significant." He agreed. "You are very calm about this," she said. "I am not calm. I am controlled. Those are different things." "What are you feeling under the controlled?" He looked at her for a long moment. "The same thing I have been feeling since the night in the clearing when you said Boyd's name, and I realized that the most important thing I could do with that information was be worthy of it." She sat with that. Then she reached out and took his hand. He turned his palm to hold hers. The fire burned low across the grounds. The singer's voice drifted and settled. The moon was up now, full and silver, and it lit the whole clearing the same color as the night she had first met him, except that everything was different now. Everything had changed in the way that things changed when truth had been spoken and survived. She did not let go of his hand. Neither did he. Chapter 18, What She Chose. She stayed in Silver Mark. This was not a dramatic decision. She did not announce it. She simply found, as the weeks after the festival passed, that she was building things again. That the greenhouse had become partly hers. That Lola had become the kind of friend who appeared with tea at inconvenient moments and made that feel like warmth rather than interruption. That Melissa had taken to consulting her on herbal compounds as though she had always been part of the healer's practice. That Edward's hallway felt like a corridor she lived in rather than one she was visiting. She and Edward did not rush toward each other. They were both people who had learned the value of things that were built carefully, and so they built carefully, with attention, and with the specific quality of care that comes from two people who both know the cost of choosing badly and have decided, separately and then together, to choose well. He brought her to the hollow oak once more, 3 months after the festival. He did not tell her why in advance. He simply asked if she would come with him, and she said yes. When they reached the clearing, she saw what had been done. The old roots around the base of the tree had been carefully cleared and reset with flat stones, smooth gray ones, fitted together with care. At the center, where the hollow was, a small iron marker had been placed, simple, clean, with 2 words engraved. Boyd Cooper. And below that, a single line in the old wolf script that Heather had to lean close to read. Loved. Remembered. Here. She stood at the base of the oak and pressed her palm to the bark, the way she always had, and she felt the grief. She always would. She had stopped believing that grief was a problem to be solved. It was simply part of her, the shape that love left when it had nowhere to go, and she had decided to let it have its place without letting it have everything. She felt Edward move to stand beside her. She reached down and placed her hand in his. "Thank you," she said. "He deserved a marker," Edward said simply. She turned to look at the tree and the small iron plate and the soft light that came through the leaves above, and she said quietly, to Boyd, to the roots, to the years she had spent here alone. "I brought someone. He is good. He is the kind of good that stays." The forest was very still. Then she turned away from the tree with Edward's hand in hers, and they walked back through the forest towards Silver Mark. For the first time in 4 years, she did not look back. Chapter 19, Luna. The claiming ceremony was held in early summer. It was not large. This was deliberate. Heather had been offered the full ceremonial gathering that an Alpha King's chosen Luna would traditionally receive, and she had said, politely but without ambiguity, that she would prefer the people who had actually been present for the hard parts. Edward had agreed immediately. Melissa and Lola were there, Lola in a dress that she had somehow made both practical and festive and that she would later claim had been deliberately planned, which was not true but was a good story. Higgins stood at the back with his arms folded and an expression that suggested he was moved but was not going to do anything dramatic about it. Irene had come as well. She stood apart from the others, quietly, her dark eyes steady. When Heather caught her eye across the room, Irene gave a single nod. Heather nodded back. Lisa, the friend who had kept Heather's earliest years of exile survivable with nothing more than letters sent to borderland trading posts, had traveled 2 days to be there. She was the person who cried openly and without apology and provided a useful anchor for everyone else who wanted to cry but was pretending not to. The ceremony itself was simple. Edward spoke. He said what he meant. He said it clearly and without performance, and it was exactly right. Heather spoke. She said that she had not come to Silver Mark to become anything except herself, and that everything she was becoming was simply more of herself than she had been allowed to be before. She said that was not a romantic statement, it was an accurate one, and if it also happened to be romantic she was comfortable with that. There was laughter. She had not planned the laughter. But it was hers, light and real and surprised out of her by the moment, and it was perhaps the best thing that happened all day. After the ceremony, Edward told her something she had not known. He said that the hollow oak, and the land around it, had been formally registered with the regional council under the name Boyd's Rest. The land would be maintained as neutral ground, open to any pack member who needed a place to mourn privately. The iron marker would remain. The trees would not be touched. Heather sat with this for a long time. He did something. She said finally. Boyd. He did. Edward said. His death uncovered something that was going to hurt many more people if it stayed hidden. The land acquisition Ricardo was trying to complete would have displaced 3 small pack communities that had been farming those valleys for generations. If we had not followed the truth about Boyd, those communities would be gone now. She was quiet. He saved them. She said. By being exactly who he was. Edward said. A child who was loved and remembered by his mother long enough for the truth to be found. Heather pressed her hand flat on the table, the way she pressed her hand flat on bark. She breathed. She thought about 4 years of apologies at the base of a hollow tree. She thought about the night she had told Boyd she would not stop trying to find out what happened. She thought about the promise she had kept without knowing what keeping it would cost or what keeping it would ultimately give back. He was here. She said. Even for the time he had. He was here. Yes. Said Edward. He was. Chapter 20, The Oak in Summer. She went back to Boyd's Rest on a morning in midsummer, alone. Not the way she used to go. Not at midnight under a full moon with grief pressing down on her like weather. She went in the early light, when the forest was gold and green and the birds were making their ordinary noise and the earth was warm under her feet. She sat at the base of the oak and she put her hand on the bark. She did not apologize. She had decided she was done apologizing to her son for things that had not been her fault. She talked to him instead. She told him about the greenhouse and about Lola's ongoing argument with Melissa that had expanded to include the best way to dry winter herbs and was currently being mediated by Heather as an entirely unwilling third party. She told him about Higgins, who had informed her last week with great seriousness that the training drill dispute had been resolved and the correct answer had been his all along, which meant the solution was probably a compromise that everyone had agreed to credit to Higgins to keep the peace. She told him about Edward. About how he still sighed in the corridor when the work was long, and how she still told him to go to bed, and how he still said he was almost done, and how this had become one of the rhythms of her life that she did not want to change. She told him about Boyd's Rest and about the pack families who had been coming to the clearing in the weeks since it opened, quietly, ones and twos, people who had needed a place like this for a long time and had not had one. You are doing something. She told him. You are still doing something. I want you to know that. The light moved through the leaves above her. She sat for a while longer, not speaking, just being present in the way she had always been present here. But different. The grief was still there. It would always be there. It was simply no longer the only thing. She stood. She looked at the iron marker. She looked at the hollow where the little wooden horse still sat, facing outward, its carved face catching the morning light. She pressed her hand one more time to the bark. I love you. She said. I am okay. And that is not a betrayal of you. I needed to learn that. She walked back through the summer forest toward Silvermark. Toward the greenhouse and Lola and Melissa and Higgins and the ongoing training drill argument and the hallway outside the library and the man who stayed. Toward her life. Toward what she had built, slowly and stubbornly and without permission from anyone who had ever tried to tell her she was too broken to build. Behind her, in the clearing, the oak stood in the summer light with its roots deep in the earth and its branches spread wide, the way it had stood for 100 years and more, before any pack had come and any border had been drawn. Holding memory. Holding truth. Holding Boyd. The end. Thank you for staying to the end. Subscribe, like, and share. Leave a comment telling us your thoughts about the story. Every word you share helps more people find stories like this one. Things you can take with you. Stories like Heather's are not just fiction. They carry real truths about real human experiences. Here is what this story quietly teaches. 1. Grief is not the same as failure. Heather spent 4 years carrying her grief as though it was proof she had done something wrong. The truth is that grief is simply what love looks like when it has no place to go. You are allowed to mourn without it meaning you have failed. Mourning is not weakness. It is one of the most human things a person can do. 2. Silence does not protect you. It protects the people who harmed you. Every year Heather stayed silent was a year the truth stayed buried alongside Boyd. The people who needed her quiet were the people who had done something worth hiding. Speaking the truth, even when it is costly, is often the only thing that ends the cycle. 3. You are allowed to heal without letting go. Heather did not have to forget Boyd to find peace. She did not have to choose between honoring his memory and building a life. You can carry the people you have lost with you into your healing. Their memory does not have to be the wall that stops you. It can be the root that grounds you. 4. The people who tell you that you are broken are usually protecting their own interests. Elder Soren called Heather's bloodline defective because a healthy Heather with a living child was a threat to someone's political plan. The verdict that felt like truth was, in fact, a strategy. Before you accept someone's assessment of your worth, ask what they gain from you believing it. 5. Real leadership protects the vulnerable, even when it is not convenient. Edward did not have to pursue Heather's case. There was nothing straightforward about it for him. He did it because something was wrong and he was in a position to address it. That is what leadership actually looks like. Not the easy decisions, but the ones that require you to do the right thing when doing nothing would be simpler. 6. Power without integrity always collapses eventually. Ricardo built an entire political future on a lie and a murder. He had resources and connections and carefully maintained appearances. And it all fell apart because one woman kept coming back to a hollow tree, and one man thought that was worth investigating. The truth is patient. It waits. And it arrives at the most inconvenient moment for the people who tried to bury it. 7. Forgiveness is not the same as acceptance. Heather chose not to carry Soren's face home with her from the tribunal. That was not the same as saying what Soren did was acceptable. Justice was served. What Heather refused to carry was not the accountability, it was the weight of ongoing rage that would have harmed her, not Soren. You can want justice and still put down the burden of hatred. Both things are true at once. 8. The people who stay are the ones who matter. Heather lost many people across 4 years. What she found in Silvermark was small and quiet and built slowly. Melissa's pragmatic warmth. Lola's relentless cheerfulness. Higgins' dry loyalty. Edward's steady presence. None of them arrived dramatically. They simply showed up, repeatedly, and stayed. That is what community actually looks like. 9. What happens to you is not the final word on who you are. Heather was told she was cursed, defective, bad luck, and broken. She was none of those things. She was a woman who had been targeted by people who needed her to believe she was powerless. The story she was handed was not her story. She wrote her own. So can you. 10. The dead we love are not truly gone as long as we carry them honestly. Boyd lived for no time at all in the visible world. But his existence uncovered a conspiracy, protected 3 communities, became a place of remembrance for people who needed one, and gave his mother back the courage to live fully. None of that would have happened if Heather had let them erase him. Love that refuses to be silent can change more than we imagine. To everyone viewing this, whatever hollow tree you have been kneeling before, whatever grief you have been carrying alone in the dark, you are allowed to let someone else kneel beside you. You are allowed to be found. You are allowed to stay. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Our pack grows one story at a time. We are glad you are here.